Fierce protests are erupting in China, pushing back against a brutal zero-COVID policy. Some are even calling for President Xi to step down as they beg for relaxed rules. Chinese protesters are getting support from Biden's top medical advisor. Watch this.
What is going on in China, and why do they seem to be in a worse place than anyone else in the world?
Well, their approach has been very, very severe and rather draconian in the kinds of shutdowns without a seeming purpose. It seems that in China, it was just a very, very strict, extraordinary lockdown where you lock people in the house, but without any seemingly end game to it.
Meanwhile, overall Americans are less worried, with a new poll showing nearly 60% are not worried about the virus. But just after he slammed China's restrictions, Fauci was speaking out of the other end of his mouth for Americans. Listen.
We certainly are still in it. I think you just need to look at the numbers. We're still having between 300 and 400 deaths per day. So I think the idea that, forget it, this is over, it isn't.
All right, let's start with that. There's a lot to get to in this segment, and I wanted to start micro with China, but Joe, I got to come to you on Fauci's flip-flop here. It's draconian, and it's severe when it's happening in China, but he clearly had no problem doing it here.
He's ubiquitous, isn't he,
yeah.
Dr. Fauci? And that's two shows that we've shown him on already this morning. I thought he was retiring. The man needs to go on a diet. I mean a media diet, because he just seems to be everywhere, and he contradicts himself to your exact point around not being for lockdowns when he was totally for lockdowns. But these in China, just to be fair, are a whole different level than anything that we experienced here, right? And you had that one fire at an apartment complex, killed 10 people because they were literally being held within the apartment complex. But I would think China would have learned by now that you can't control this thing. There is no, what did we do at the beginning of the pandemic? It was called tracing, right?
Where you contact tracing.
Yeah, contact tracing. So if I could find out how Charlie got it, then we can make sure that he doesn't give it to anybody else. No, you're going to get it. It's a matter of treating it at this point. You're not going to stop a virus that will go wherever it will go.
And speaking of what is happening on the ground in China, we've got a soundbite from Congressman Gallagher. It really sums it up quite well.
We are 3 years after a virus that likely leaked from a lab in Wuhan, China. They're still welding Chinese people into their apartments. We've had apartment buildings burned down with people locked inside. We have toddlers being taken from their parents and put into quarantine camps. They're using the pretense of public health in order to institute a system of total techno-totalitarian control. And that's not just for domestic use. That's a model of repression they want to export around the world.
So this is really interesting, and those pictures are interesting as well, what's happening on the ground in China. And you wonder, because I feel like President Xi has been emboldened in some ways. He got his third term to Congress. He's, watching what's going on around the world, realizing that he can have more impact maybe than he thought he would before. And he's trying to institute this kind of control over the people, but they're not having it, at least for now. I mean, I'm not really sure where this will go, but do you think that he's losing his footing a little bit?
Oh, I think whether he is or I think he is, but more importantly, he's always afraid of that. You're talking about 1.2 billion people, and it's an aging population. It's and I don't want to minimize what a threat China is to the United States, because it is our greatest global threat. All of our foreign policy should revolve around how to address China, but Xi Jinping has a lot on his hands. You've got an aging population. You've got, again, 1.2 billion people. How do you manage that? You have a highly centralized economy. The centralized economies don't generally work. They're very problematic. We've never seen one this large. And so he has lots of problems on his hands. But I think a lot of that authoritarian impulses are a result of those problems.
Yeah.
But what we're saying, the idea that you have people, thousands of people in the streets protesting, and the police are standing there like, we don't even know what to do. We've never experienced this before. Yeah. We've never even had to seek, direction from authorities about what to do about this. I think underscores just what a untenable situation he's in. And also, and we have to always remember this, freedom is not something that just Americans want. Freedom is something that it is a human impulse. And that's what's so beautiful about the founding of this country, is that it was understanding that all humans yearn to be free. And obviously, the Chinese people live under a horrible dictatorship, but They want to be free.
And Congressman Gallagher brought this up at the top of that soundbite. You know, he talks about where COVID originated. We're almost 3 years from when, you know, it erupted here in the United States, and still no accountability.
Well, you'd have to be an idiot to not think it came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, right? They're working on coronavirus research with gain of function that we funded, which is why Dr. Fauci is so shifty on the issue and covering for China. But let's also not pretend that we're that much better from China on this issue than the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, you had a Rasmussen poll. Nearly half of Democrats wanted to put someone like me for not getting the vaccine in a government camp. Almost half of Democrats wanted to fine or imprison people for simply questioning the efficacy of a vaccine. I could not go out to dinner in New York City for a period of time. You were rejected from a restaurant, kicked out of a restaurant. You had Joe Biden still purging military heroes for not wanting to get a vaccine that the Florida Surgeon General says increases cardiac deaths in young men by 84%. So, like, let's not pretend that the United States is that much better than China on this issue. And what was sad, and I think what COVID really underscored, is that you think just because we're in America, because we're a republic, somehow we're immune to tyranny. We are not. We saw it. Joe Biden's a tyrant. Justin Trudeau's a tyrant, right? We saw that Canada, Australia, all these countries that are supposed to be free are not.
And what was that story we saw this week, right? Where a majority of deaths from coronavirus in this country were by those who were vaccinated more than unvaccinated. In other words, you know, what we were promised and what we're seeing now are two very different things. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, so we have to fight for freedom. Like, we have to preserve it. I mean, that's what Ronald Reagan warned to us, that freedom is just one generation from extinction. And I really think that's what we saw during COVID. I know it woke me up in seeing that tyranny was here, seeing what these people would do. Thank God we have a constitution. You know, thank God we have checks and balances to the executive power, to Joe Biden. But boy, it was here, and it's still here.
And not
You
only
can't take
that,
it for granted.
but you weren't even allowed to ask questions about it.
I did, but you know,
No, but
I don't think people liked it, but I did it anyway.
And a lot of people backed down and didn't ask questions. And those who did got absolutely destroyed for it.
I did. It wasn't fun, but you know, I felt like it was the right thing to do, and I thought it was wrong to see people getting fired over a vaccine that most vaccines have 5 to 10 years of research. This had less than a year. mRNA is new to the market, and we just didn't know, and instead people were shoving it in people's arms, and it was wrong, and it's still wrong, and I will defend it till this day, and I do not regret not getting it.
One quick point, 10 seconds. Kyrie Irving, who plays for the Brooklyn Nets here in New York, he was allowed to play away games. There it was okay to play, but not in New York, because that's where it could really spread on the floor. And meanwhile, 19,000 people at the Barclays Centers without masks on. I mean, when you think back on this, it's insanity.
It was pretty incredible, and certainly will be
Very passionate about it.
of course, and will be analyzed.
As you can tell.
But we're gonna have to leave it there. Straight ahead, it's been more than 2